Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I'm glad you were able. Probably many of you went to the rally today, and thank you for coming. So thanks for stopping by the library on your way back. Well, first thing I'm going to do is kind of a public service announcement. The library is turning 100 years old in 2 years, and we are conducting a survey. It's a kind of an accessibility survey to find out what people need in order to be able to use the library. Are there things that we aren't doing that you need to have us do so that you can make it easier to use? We have been sending out emails. The survey is available on Facebook and social media. We also have some hard copies at the desk if you want to fill it out before you go home today. And if just take a look and look for this flyer here. And we have the links to the survey, both in English and Spanish. So if you would fill it out, we'd sure appreciate it. And if you could pass it along to your friends as well, we would appreciate that as well. So, and I don't think there's a huge deadline. Claire, do you know what the deadline is to fill it? Probably about a month. About a month, okay. So you have some time to do it. But please do that because we want to make it as accessible as possible. And for our 2-year anniversary, our anniversary in 2 years, we would like to be able to do something in commemoration of that. Please fill that out. All right, I am really excited to be introducing our speaker today, Jakob. I read his book. Now, I don't read too many mysteries. I will admit that I've read all of Louise Penny's mysteries, but I read this one, and this is a fabulous book. If you haven't read it yet, you really need to. We have a copy here in the library. We have some copies here that he will sign and sell to you. But please take a look at this book. This is really, it's fast and furious. It's a really fast read. Lots of twists and turns. You think you know what's going on, and then it just. So yeah, it's really a wonderful book. So I am going to introduce Jakob. First, I want to say thank you, Lisa, for giving birth.
Oh my goodness, 10 pounds, 8 ounces.
Oh, serious? Sorry. The New York
I'm
Times.
gonna go, I think.
We're going.
That's fine.
You ought to be used to it by now.
I am. Trust me. Anyway.
The New York Times has praised the mystery Dead Money as one of the best thrillers of 2025, and author Jakob Kerr will discuss his debut novel right now. Set in Silicon Valley, Dead Money begins with the murder of Trevor Cannon. Now, was that Cannon as in Cannon Beach?
I mean, you can pronounce it the same way, but yeah. I don't know where I got the name inspiration from, but that's probably part of it.
I kept wondering.
Yeah.
It's not spelled the same, but I kept wondering. The CEO of the hottest startup, Journey. Later, it is learned that Cannon, who feared such a possibility of his death, had changed his will to include a dead money clause, specifying that in the event of his murder, his $20 billion in company stock would remain frozen until his murder is solved. From there, the story takes numerous twists and turns involving a ruthless venture capitalist, a young investigator, the FBI, and several quirky technology experts who add details to the plot, which continues to surprise through the last page. In Dead Money, Kerr is the son of Cannon Beach residents Bruce and Lisa Kerr, draws on his experiences to create the novel. Kerr spent 15 years as a lawyer and communications executive in the San Francisco tech industry. He now lives in Seattle. Publishers Weekly called Kerr a formidable new talent. In addition, the Seattle Times says Dead Money is exhilarating and unpredictable, packed with jaw-dropping twists, a compelling outsider heroine, and scathing insights into the tech world's glittering facade. Dead Money is an electrifying debut that demands to be devoured. So I think we're going to start with me asking a question.
Sure.
And then I'm going to let you go ahead and talk. And if anybody wants to just come in with some questions, that would be great. I have other questions as well. So we won't be without questions.
I like to do this just in a very open Q&A. So raise your hand or just start yapping, whatever you want to do. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, you're a lawyer and in communications. Why did you decide you wanted to write a mystery in the first place? And what specifically was it that prompted you to even think about the plot that you finally wrote about?
Sure. I think I went to law school, I passed the bar, and then I sort of had studied communications in college and had always, really liked to write. And so found my way out of the law. Like I never really, much to my parents' chagrin, actually, I knew that I didn't want to practice law from the very moment I started law school. Long story. So I graduated and then kind of found my way into communications and I was living in San Francisco, so I sort of was a natural, I was interested in the tech industry and it was a natural fit for me to kind of go into that field. But I had always really loved to write, and I think that started by just being a really voracious reader. I've always been a big reader, and all of growing up, I read a ton. And even as like a teenager, I was reading all of the big commercial fiction books and also like a lot of mysteries and thrillers. I always had just like a chapter book on me at all times, pretty much. And I remember reading books by authors like Agatha Christie when I was young, and seeing the plot come together at the end and feeling like I was doing a puzzle at the same time that I was reading, and I really liked that sensation and that feeling. And so it was always just kind of in the back of my mind, it'd be fun to try that someday. I tried my hand at writing. I just decided to I had some ideas floating around in my head, decided to try my hand at writing, and I always had felt that a mystery like this one would lend itself very well to Silicon Valley. I have, for better or for worse, spent most of my career working in the tech industry. It's a really interesting place. I think it's got a lot of great pros to it, also many cons. But more than anything, I think it's just a very quirky, as you put it, very rich like landscape in which to set a story. And my longtime reading interests sort of converged with my professional background, and they just sort of came together in a really interesting way. And once I started putting the story together, I realized, I don't think I've read anything like this already, and I don't think anybody's set a mystery novel or like a thriller novel in this setting before. And it just felt really fun to start writing it, and I just kind of went from there.
Wow. So was there anything in particular, like the words dead money?
Sure.
When did you run across that phrase and how did that start you going?
Yeah, I mean, the dead money, so I can back up. The first time I started to make the connection about the sort of like the mystery and the tech industry was I spent a long time working at Airbnb, which I know is kind of a four-letter word in this town. Very, very used to that. I say many times. Yeah. I'm like I said before, I'm well aware. And I am very well versed in all the sort of many pros and cons of Airbnb specifically. But when I was working there was a period in the sort of mid 2010s when a bunch of different sort of prominent tech founders started kind of getting in a lot of hot water for, however you want to put it, corruption, fraud, bad behavior across a bunch of different levels. And I remember, when I was working in the industry, just looking at all the news stories and investors getting pissed off and forcing founders out and all this drama, and just thinking to myself, wow, some of these founders are such lightning rods right now. If one of them was, if there was like a murder mystery with one of them, the list of suspects would be like 100 people long, right? They're really unpopular, and just, kind of these interesting characters. And that's when I first started thinking like, oh, this could be a really interesting sort of connection point. For Dead Money specifically, that's a phrase that I had just come across in other aspects of my life and hobbies, and it had always just kind of stuck in my head as a good title. So I knew I wanted it to be the title when I started writing the book. And then I was, putting the story together, and I came up with this idea for this clause in the founder's will that would basically, it's sort of a modern, like tech version of the, like, oh, nobody gets like my what's inside my safe until my murder is solved. But instead, what's inside the safe is control over this like massive, this incredibly successful startup company. And I knew I wanted the clause to be in the will. And for a couple of days, I couldn't figure out like, what am I going to call this clause? Like, or how am I going to explain what it is? And then I just sort of like looked at the title and was like, oh, duh. Like it's like I should just call it the Dead Money Clause, and then just tie it that'll tie everything together. And so, it wasn't exactly a feat of creative, brilliance there, but it was, I think, reflective of one of the things that I have found when writing books is that you're onto something when the different sort of narrative threads in your mind start to kind of intersect and connect in very natural ways, and then they kind of like pile onto each other, and that's when you're kind of like onto something good. So yeah.
Anybody have any questions?
Okay, well, the thing that I found so interesting in here is the excesses of the tech world, and how, I mean, just how, what a bunch of spoiled children they were with all this excess money, and how realistic is that?
Very realistic. I think one of the things that has been very gratifying about the book is, since it came out, all of my, I still, like, full disclosure, I still work in the tech industry. Like, it's still part of my life.
They let you back in?
It did, yeah. It took a while. Yeah. You have to find the right company. You have to find a place that doesn't really
Read.
like, yeah. It's easy. Yeah. That part was easy. No, I had to find a place that was didn't really like to wasn't on the tech insider sort of crony cabal. But no, I think one of the gratifying parts of the book is that since it came out, a lot of my friends who worked with me at Airbnb or still work in tech are very immersed in it. Even like one of the founders of Airbnb, they all really loved the book, and they all said, you really like nailed the atmosphere and the environment. Because I think the tech industry has its fair share of people in it who are just, kind of clueless and entitled, and, sort of live this lifestyle that they think that they just are like masters of the universe style, right? But the tech industry is also really huge. And I'd say like upwards of 90% of the people working in it like have some awareness of how ridiculous it is, right? They all have their own reasons for being in it. And I think the main character in Dead Money, Mackenzie, is sort of emblematic of that, right? It's a person who, she's kind of like an insider outsider, and she's able to maintain perspective on all the excess and ridiculousness of the industry while still having her own reasons for being part of it. And I think that that's true for a lot of people in real life who work in the industry too, and many of them, were my friends and still are. And I think they enjoyed seeing that reflected in the story. And then I also think there's a piece of it too that is, it, so my wife, when we were living in San Francisco, my wife worked in a big children's hospital there, and I would go pick her up at the end of every day, and we would talk about our day at the office. And she would talk about all this ridiculous, these like really traumatic and like very important things that she was working on. And I would talk about how like they serve prime rib for lunch in the cafeteria. And it just really like, it sharpened the contrast in my mind. And I was always very grateful that I had had a lot of jobs and experience, before I got into the tech industry. So I was able to, compare it like all of the people that I'm closest with who work in the tech industry, we all understand that our jobs do not operate in the real world, right? It's like all this very strange, money driven, unique place where employees are treated incredibly well, like royalty. And, I had a very stark reminder of that every day when I would talk to my wife about these things. I also think, you know, there is a lot of there's a lot more depth to the industry than I had seen depicted in a lot of other popular culture. So I think, you know, if you look at most movies or TV shows or books that are set in tech or about tech, they really like they're kind of two things. One, they really focus on like all the trappings and the beanbag chairs and all that stuff. And there's plenty of that in the book, like because it's very entertaining, right? The kombucha stations and the espresso machines and the prosecco on tap and the ball pit, like all that was real. Like I had meetings in a ball pit one time. So like it's that's all very real. But there's also a lot more depth to the industry, I think, under that sort of layer of kind of ridiculous amenities and trappings. There's also a ton of ambition, a ton of money floating around, a lot of like greed and calculation, and just, this very sort of deep undercurrent of ambition that's always bubbling below the surface of this very California glass walls, sunny, optimistic, radiant place. And I thought that that was really interesting sort of dichotomy that had not been captured yet. And, I wanted to kind of dive into that. And similarly, most of those same depictions in popular culture that I'm talking about, they're very focused on the founders, right? And like everybody's heard about Steve Jobs and the WeWork guy and the Theranos woman and the Uber guy. And like the founder is always kind of like the main character of these stories. And again, I get it because they're really over the top and like very, entertaining characters, but I find the lower layers of the industry to be much more interesting because that's where you really get the people who are, kind of grapple with their own consciences or, really like striving to get to the top of the mountain and making sacrifices along the way. And I wanted to focus my story on that group of people instead of the founders. So I just killed the founder at the beginning. So, yeah.
Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah,
How long
please.
did it take to write?
So I was talking to Nancy about that. It's a tricky question. I had the idea in my head for a long time. I, was kind of like jotting down ideas about it here and there for many years. And then when I actually sat down to write it at the computer, it was probably like 7 months, 8 months, something like that. It went pretty fast, but there was a long period of time before that where I would, write a chapter, try it out, see how it felt, or like work on the outline or those sort of things. But, you know, the other thing that's interesting about that question is that this isn't actually the first book that I've written. It's the first one that's been published. It's my debut novel, but I wrote a I wrote another novel a few years prior, back in like 2019, 2020, that was also set in the tech industry, but wasn't a mystery, it wasn't a thriller. It was much more of a kind of almost like a coming of age story or like a comedy to a degree. And that's how I originally got a literary agent. That book did not sell. So, I worked on it for a very long time. It went through the whole process. We really thought it was going to sell to a publisher and it didn't. And after that, I was, naturally pretty discouraged for a time. So it took me a while to kind of get back to the, documents and start writing again. But once I did, it was, I felt like I really had something. And then it was probably like 7 or 8 months until it was done.
Did you have a schedule? Like you get up early in the morning and write, or you write
No.
after work, or?
No, I wrote it so we have, my wife and I have 3 boys now.
Oh,
And when I wrote this, we had 2, including, we had when I started writing it, our oldest was just under 2, and our youngest, who's now our middle son, Sam, he was probably like 4 or 5 months old. So, yeah, we had 2 little boys. So I didn't have a schedule for anything. Writing in between diaper changes and jotting things down on my phone. And like, I think a bulk of my writing would happen at night after everybody else was in bed. But there was no rhyme or reason to it. I just tried to grab as much time as I could wherever I could. And, I think part of that was a good thing because it didn't allow me to get too precious about my writing time. And it was just very, try to get in where you fit in and see what you can get done. And it prevented me from, I think every writer, especially novel writers, suffers from this phenomenon where you write something and then you go to sit down the next day to start writing the next thing, but instead you scroll up and you start rewriting the thing that you wrote the day before. I didn't really have the luxury of time to do that. I mean, I still did plenty of that, of course, but a lot of the time it was, okay, I have a really clear outline in my head. I know where this is going. I know what I need to write next. Let's just bang out a couple paragraphs, even if that's all I can get done, and then, just keep it moving forward. So.
Some of your research, I was curious about how much research you really had to do because there were so many different aspects of it.
Sure.
But the one that I was really curious about was the Burning Man.
Oh yeah.
How many times did you go to Burning Man?
I have never been to Burning
Oh, is
Man.
that? You do
It's
a
a badge
great
of honor.
description.
I will also never go. So, yeah, no, that's a very common question. I mean, if you haven't read the book, there's a scene that takes place at Burning Man. It's a big scene. I won't go into detail about what happens there because it's very important to the story. But when you live in San Francisco for a long time, I lived there for 15 years. I had a lot of friends who went to Burning Man many years. This is absolutely true at Airbnb and almost every tech company. Work really, really like slows to an absolute halt at the end of August for about a week or a week and a half because so many people in the industry are at Burning Man. It's like a little holiday break almost. Like you have to plan around it as a company. So I knew plenty about it. I had osmosized like tons of information about it. And then, I had just talked to a lot of friends who had been. I watched a lot of like videos of people doing tours of the camps and stuff. I had read a bunch of different articles about it, and I just felt like I had a good sense of it. And was able to kind of like dig into the detail of it, even though I had never been there. The funny thing is when I set out to write the book, that was one of the first things in my head. I was like, I really want to set like a big scene at Burning Man. I was like, I'm sure that somebody has done this before. And I started researching and looking, and it was nobody had done that. And I was like, this is gonna be great. Like, and I was really excited to write that part. And it was a part of the book that I just was like looking forward to the whole time. And then when I got there, it was really, really fun to write. So yeah.
It's very vivid.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It really feels like you're there.
It was originally, that section was even longer in the first draft because there was a lot, even more like detail and stuff to it, but have to, keep things moving. But yeah, it was really fun to write.
Did your Burning Man friends authenticate?
Yeah, they all were very impressed, and that it seems like you've been before. And people are very surprised when I tell them that I've never gone.
And you never will.
No. Well, and also, I think somebody got killed at this year's Burning Man.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of people send me a link to that news story when that happened. So yeah. But no, Burning Man is a good, I think, emblem or just like a microcosm of what simultaneously exasperates me. Yes, professional writer. And you know, it's like the promise and the peril of the tech industry in one event. Its ethos and its underlying sort of premise, I think, is actually pretty cool. And you know, it's about like humanity and togetherness and like people just celebrating and having a good time. And then over the years, it's really kind of like turned into it's become increasingly commercialized. And now you have sort of like it used to be a bunch of people driving their old like, you know, dusty station wagons to the desert and hanging out for a couple of days. And now you have, you know, tech people flying in their private jets and like laying out like Persian rugs on the floor of the desert and hanging out. And it's just it's kind of emblematic of everything that's happened in the industry. So yeah.
What about the other research you must have had to do with the FBI and
Yeah.
that whole area?
Yes. So the main character in the book, Mackenzie, she is not a cop. She's not she's not like a trained detective. She doesn't work for law enforcement or the Justice Department. She works for a venture capitalist as like an investigator, essentially. And as part of the story, she basically her boss uses his influence and power to get her attached to the FBI investigation as his kind of eyes and ears, which I feel like, you know, seems like a little bit of a silly premise, but with every year that goes by, it seems more and more realistic that that could happen. And so, you know, she is partnering with an FBI agent. And so I did need to do some, you know, baseline research on how the FBI works, just to make sure you know, it was all depicted in a realistic way. But one of the benefits of positioning the story that way is that, you know, the reader is coming at this through the eyes of Mackenzie, and she doesn't really care about all the boring FBI details, right? It's just like, yeah, okay, whatever. So it's like that and so as the writer, you don't need to go into great detail about FBI procedures because the main character doesn't care about it. So, and it's all through her eyes, right? There were some elements, I don't want to like, again, spoil anything, like the FBI involvement becomes more and more, you know, sort of deeper as the story goes on and changes in key ways, and that required more research. But I also think my law school and like legal background helped a lot there as well, because at the end of the day, it was all about, you know, it all kind of eventually traces up to like legal proceedings and, you know, criminal cases and that kind of stuff. So you can think backwards from that. And that was helpful too.
Do you think the book appeals to a certain demographic of
Yeah.
people, either age-wise or whatever?
Yeah, that's been another thing that's been really wonderful to see about it is I think it's the answer is no. Like it seems to be pretty universal. I was, you know, I I think there were sort of two different ways of looking at that. I think I had some concern at first that, you know, oh, is this only going to be interesting to people that have worked in the tech industry or who are younger and who are familiar with all of this? But I really tried to combat all the tech stuff from a perspective of somebody that, you know, is aware of it, but not, you don't have to know the tech industry inside and out to be able to enjoy the book, right? And so I've gotten a lot of feedback from people who have sent me emails or told me in person, like, I don't like the tech industry. I don't ever read anything about it, but I really enjoyed your book, which has been great. And then on the flip side, like I said earlier, my friends who are still in the industry have all really loved it because they say that the, you know, verisimilitude is right on. And it's just, you know, I got a lot of the details and interactions and hierarchy, right, which is great. So that's been really nice to see. I also, you know, I think pretty early on, before it was, I had sold the book and we were going through the editing process with the publisher, like the folks at Penguin Random House. And, you know, I was feeling good about it, but I was still sort of like sharing it with friends and family and seeing how they were reacting. And I have, you know, I have a bunch of friends who read a lot and friends who really like mystery books, and all of them like read it really fast and really liked it. And I was like, that's a great signal, right? maybe I have something good here. But then I also had a very good friend who never reads anything fiction. He only reads nonfiction. He only reads like the most dry, boring stuff ever. And he read the whole thing in like 2 sittings on a, like on during a trip, and texted me afterwards about how much he loved it and just like the different parts of it that he liked. He said, this is the first fiction book I've read in years. And he was like, very honestly, like I would not have done it if I didn't enjoy it, that. And for me, that was a nice signal too, like, okay, this might have a chance at like breaking through beyond just folks who like mysteries, or beyond folks who are, have some exposure to the tech industry. So yeah.
How about age? What's a
Age has been
lower?
across the board. I mean, I've heard from a bunch of people. I mean, I haven't met too many people in their 20s who read right now. I don't say it. I could go into a whole diatribe about why I think that is. I think it's in large part due to, the industry that I am a part of. But no, I mean, lots of people in their 20s, 30s have really told me they loved it. A lot of the sort of reviews online and readers online have really loved it. And then I get a lot of really nice feedback and emails and stuff from older generations as well. And like I got an email from this guy who, he was like, I live in Sedona, Arizona. It's just me and my dog. He's like, I'm a veteran. He's like, I haven't read a book in many years. I read your whole thing cover to cover. I really loved it. And I was like, that's incredibly nice. And like I sent him a signed copy, and now he emails me pictures of the sunset in Sedona pretty much every day.
Better than its dog.
I can do without, but it's very nice. And yeah, I've seen a wide range of feedback on it, just across all ages and stuff, which has been
We
great.
wouldn't necessarily recommend it for a teen.
For a teenager, no. I mean, it depends. There's nothing in it that's like terrible, but probably not.
Maybe a mature teen.
Yeah, sorry, you had your hand up in the back there.
Your next project, is it on your mind?
Yeah, so I've been working on another follow-up book for a little while. It's been like a bit of a slog. I'm just being very transparent. Like I've had some different ideas. I've been working through them and trying to figure out kind of what will actually stick or what excites me in the same way. I also have the aforementioned now 3 children and a new dog, so it's going to be a little while, but this is still very much long-term, like the plan. And I'm still, working with my same editor and publisher, and hopefully I will have another one. And I still want to, write. I think there's still plenty of room for more kind of like mystery stories in this same setting, like not the same characters, but and not necessarily a sequel or anything, but just there's still plenty of territory to mine. And I also think that this book captures a certain era within the tech industry in Silicon Valley, and it's reflective of the era that I spent a lot of my time in, like a really like 2012 to 2000 to 2020 era of how things were operating there. And I think the tech industry has now shifted a lot because of AI. And, that's, I think it would be interesting to kind of like write a book that sort of keeps up with the change of the times there. So, of course. Over here.
Do any of your friends think they found a little bit of themselves in your books?
Sure. Yeah. I've had friends who told me they couldn't read it because they just kept hearing my voice, which is fine. Yes. And also like a lot of friends have pointed out like, oh, this character is this person that we used to work with who was insufferable, right? And I would always say every character is fictional, it's an amalgamation of different people. But yeah, there are definitely like pieces of friends and former colleagues and just people I've encountered along the way. I do think that there are no real like one-for-one mapping comparisons. Like everybody, you know, all the characters in this book are sort of amalgamations of different people I've met along the way, and then also parts of myself as well. I think one of the lessons that I took away from writing this is that it's really hard to write a character that feels real and authentic unless you find some part of yourself you can map into them. And that can either be like a really big part of yourself, or it can even just be like a very small impulse or feeling that you had one time that you can remember and kind of like tap into as a basis for a character. Without that, I think it's hard. And there are some characters in this book that really channel a lot of my own sort of personal worldview and viewpoint and how I, you know, my personality and all that stuff. And then there are other characters where, yeah, I feel like I'm completely different than that person, but you know, there is like a shared impulse, like I said, or some kind of, you know, feeling that I have had at some point in my life that I tried to tap into when I wrote them. So in the back there.
Is Hollywood calling?
Yeah.
If not, do you want Hollywood to call?
Oh, Hollywood called.
That's
For better and for worse. So Hemingway had this famous quote. He said, if Hollywood asks you for your book, drive up to the fence outside of Hollywood, throw your book over the fence, wait for them to throw the money back to you, and then drive away as fast as you can. And like I think that's very accurate. No, so the rights, the TV film rights sold for dead money, even I would say 4 or 5 months. Actually, they sold almost 18 months before the book came out. So the book sold, the Dead Money sold to Penguin Random House in May 2023. And then there's a long editing process, and then everything in publishing takes a very long time. So there's a lot of like, you got to get it on the calendar at the right time. And if it's a new author, you don't want, you will rarely see like books by new authors come out in the fall, because that's like the heavy hitter time for publishing. That's when the new J.K. Rowling or Stephen King or whomever is going to come out, because all the publishers are trying to get it out for holiday sales and, you know, Q4 numbers. So so there was a bunch of, it was a long wait, right? And in that time, the TV film rights sold to Paramount TV. And then like a couple weeks after they sold, Paramount based like news broke that Paramount was like gonna go through this, you know, some sort of gross corporate acquisition, merger, shuttering, dissolution process. So basically like within like 6 months, Paramount TV no longer existed. So the rights went back on the market in March of this year, and they resold again pretty fast, which is great. This time to Universal. So Universal has the rights. The group of people that bought the rights, they're really great. I have no idea whether they're actually going to make, I think the idea would be like a TV show. I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll see. You know, I really do like the people a lot who, you know, bought the rights. I think they're great and like super smart, really, really sharp. But it's really hard to get things made in Hollywood, especially right now. So I have no idea what's going to happen, and we'll just have to wait and see. So,
Whoa.
Yeah.
That sounds like the start of your next book.
very, very potentially, yeah. Hollywood is its own very strange beast of an industry, and it's you know, yeah, it's a weird place. You've had your hand up for a while, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
At what point did you allow your parents to read the book?
Oh, they were like some of the first readers. I think it was like my wife Megan. I think she probably got the first copy, and then after that, it went to my parents. So yeah.
And how many edits did Luke
Surprisingly few. Yeah. And 0 that were listened to. No, there were a lot of, I sent it to a bunch of different friends and family after that as well. My Uncle Bill is also here too in the green jacket, and he got an early copy too. And we, yeah, so like I sent it to a bunch of friends and family. I wasn't, I got a lot of good feedback immediately and everybody really seemed to like it. And I thought, okay, this is a good sign. And I sent it to my agent. And I hadn't talked to my agent for quite a while just because she had been waiting for me to, see if I was going to write something new. And then I sent it to her and she's incredibly busy. She's a literary agent and, you know, I sent it to her via email and she responded. She was like, oh, I'm really excited to read this and, I'll be in touch. And I didn't hear anything from her for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And then she called me out of the blue and she was just like, I just finished your book. Like, this is a really special book. We're going to sell this like really easily. And I was like, amazing. Great. I was like, I had no idea what to expect. And it was just, yeah, it was a great phone call. So,
It's kind of a stock question, but you mentioned earlier you did a lot of reading as you were growing up. And
yeah.
Are there particular writers that influenced you or do you have an admiration for either
Yeah.
mystery thriller writers or other writers?
Yeah. The list is, it's always a tough question because I always think about the correct names to say it like later tonight. I'm sure all of them will come into my head on the spot. I think early on, like Agatha Christie was very influential. That's such a cliche answer for somebody who eventually wrote a mystery book, but I think there's a reason why, her books are considered kind of the gold standard for things like plot construction. I read a lot of general, I read a ton of everything, like all growing up and even, today I still read every night before bed. What was that?
Oh, Scott Turow.
Yeah, I read Scott Turow was a big one. Philip Margolin, I read a bunch of his books. I really enjoyed all this. So I really enjoyed all the Jack Reacher novels, which is, a really interesting sort of, I find those books really fascinating in a certain way because the author, Lee Child, after the books became very successful, he wrote like this new sort of like forward to his first Jack Reacher book. And it just gave some insight into his background. And I felt a lot of like connectivity to his viewpoint on things. And he said that before he started writing books, he had worked in television for a long time. And so he came to writing with this viewpoint that like the number one goal, the thing that he always has to do is essentially just entertain the reader. Like that is the purpose of why he is writing. He wants to write books that, are smart and incisive, but are really entertaining that people don't want to put down. And, books that stay with the reader a little bit after they finish and that they really love. But, he wasn't setting out to write the great American novel. And like, that's exactly where I'm coming from too. I wanted to write a really compelling, smart story, something that people read. Like I want people to read my book when they're on vacation. I want it to be a beach read, right? Like, read it on an airplane, please. Like, and I wanted it to be something that was really entertaining for folks, but was smart and that would stay with them for a little bit after they finished. And so when I read that from Lee Child, it just kind of compelled me to start reading all the Jack Reacher books, and I found them very just, they're a certain type of book, but I find them very propulsive and admirable in their own way. So yeah, and then I also, I read, the probably the number one genre I read the most of growing up was science fiction besides mystery thriller. Like I've read all the big sci-fi novels there are. So yeah, I've just read a little bit of everything and always have.
And just a note, we have an extensive collection of Lee Child. And
Great. Yeah, he really needs my endorsement. He's really struggling.
You're right.
Yeah, I think he's doing fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you like to read nonfiction as well?
Yes.
And would you ever consider writing nonfiction?
I would never write anything nonfiction because it's too close to my day job. Like I write a lot for work. And I think it's just an entirely different muscle in my mind. I do think there are like creative aspects to nonfiction, certainly, but it's never been something that has compelled me in the same way. And I feel like I've always been a very sort of just like realistic, pragmatic person. I feel very well versed in the nonfiction world. It surrounds me every day, and sometimes to overwhelming degree. So it's like when I read, I want to get out of it, right? And similarly when I write. And I do really like some nonfiction writers, though. Like I think Michael Lewis is just a really brilliant writer in general, because he writes nonfiction books that feel like fiction stories. Like he's very good at like putting together narrative flow and all that stuff. So, and I read a ton of just like journalism as part of my job too. So I read a lot of nonfiction as well, but I don't think I'd ever try to write it.
When you were talking about your feedback, did you have any technical feedback from anybody, for instance,
Sure.
the FBI, law enforcement, or investigations, or tech itself?
I didn't have any technical feedback. I had plenty of feedback on the fact that my main character is a woman and I am a man. And so like I wrote a scene where Mackenzie talks about how she was wearing, it's like she's wearing a blouse. And my wife said, nobody's worn a blouse since like the 1990s. I was like, that's right. Thank you very much. I need this kind of feedback. And yeah, so like some pieces of technical feedback in there, not too much though. And like so much of the book is set in a world that I know really well. And so I felt like I had a good handle on a lot of it. I do think one thing that was interesting is, again, I don't want to go like too deep into spoilers, but like, AI does play somewhat of a role in the story. And when I was writing about it, I was first writing about it in, fall 2022. And then by the time I was editing it, doing final edits in fall 2024, everything had moved and changed so incredibly quickly that I had to update a little bit of those pieces just to, make sure it wasn't like too far behind. And even if you read it now, like the references to it are probably even still a little bit outdated compared to, what's happening now. And like I work in AI now, so like I'm very well versed. I swim in it every day, and so like it's just moving really fast. It's hard to keep this. So
How did Mackenzie show up in your mind as your primary investigator?
yeah, it's a really good question. I wish I could tell you, because then I would just replicate the process and do it again. I think I've kind of learned this a little bit the hard way in trying to work on my second book. I think Mackenzie tapped into a very specific emotion or sort of like strain of thought in my mind, which I mean, honestly, it's kind of like rage, right? It was just like frustration and rage at a lot of the things that I saw in the industry over my time there, in a lot of the ways that, I felt like the promise of the industry had not, or like the reality of the industry had not lived up to the promise of it. I think, I don't remember, I think this line actually ended up hitting the cutting room floor, but when I started working in the tech industry, part of the reason I wanted to be in it was because I thought the products and the companies in the industry were so revolutionary and so powerful that they could change the kind of negative forces of capitalism, and instead it's done the other way around, right? And that is immensely frustrating to me. It continues to be. And I wanted to channel that feeling into a main character. And it's, I think it's her, it's also her mother, and the character, or her mother in the book is someone I probably identify with very, very closely. And then I also really wanted her to be, like I said, sort of like an insider outsider. So somebody that was very knowledgeable about the industry and well versed in tech, but wasn't fully part of like the insiders club, right? And so, for that reason, it was really just like the character in my mind was always a woman in part for that reason, because tech is still very much like to its own detriment, like a boys club. And I also wanted to just, once I started building on that, I tried to find other ways to kind of build on that sort of like outsider feeling for her. Like Mackenzie's very tall, and I had spoken about height. This is very random, but like I have some friends who are very tall women, and they had talked to me at times about their experiences just being, it's a unique experience. And I had a really good friend who talked to me about how it made her feel somewhat isolated at times. And I thought that was really interesting and something I wanted to channel into main character too, and figure out how that could play out in different interesting ways, and just kind of go from there. So yeah,
Mackenzie's 6'2", right?
yeah, like 6'1", 6'2".
Yeah.
So it didn't sound from what you said before, but have you ever thought about her being your investigator?
Oh, like
Over
more
series?
books. Yeah.
It's kind of a popular idea.
Yeah, I have. I think those who've read Dead Money, the plot is very multi-layered and sort of an intricate, like little. My editor put it really well. He said you created a little like intricate jewel box and you wrapped it up and you tied a bow over it. And he said if you do a sequel, you're untying the bow. And that's not to say you shouldn't do it ever, but it is, there's a power to it just kind of sitting as its own standalone thing.
Yeah.
I do think she's a compelling character. I do have ideas for, where the story could go next. I don't think it's like I think it's pretty natural sort of like evolution if I wanted to go that route. But for right now, I don't have any immediate plans to do a sequel. Sure. Back.
I want to hear your diatribe about people not reading.
Oh, and the people in their 20s.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I feel like yeah, we could be here all day. I'll try to keep it short. I think social media has essentially like sacrificed an entire generation of kids at its altar, and I think that's just, it disgusts me, and I find the big social media companies to be totally repellent. And I think, if we're not careful, AI could go in a very similar direction someday. And I'm working at a place that doesn't want it to do that. And it's not, I'm not saying the company I work for is perfect by any means, but I do know that we have a strong perspective on that. And it's one that I feel very strongly. And I think, I've talked to a lot of parents about this. I'm actually very grateful that like my kids are still quite young and are not graduating college at the same time that AI is kind of bursting into the economy. I'm also very grateful that they're not, they weren't teenagers during the rise of social media, because I talked to so many parents who are older than me, like Gen X folks, whose kids are now in their like, late teens or 20s, who said, we just didn't have any clue, like all these tools were coming out and things like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat, and they were all brand new and we didn't really know what to make of them or what to do with them. And everybody's kids and teenagers were using them. And so you just figure like, okay, how harmful can it be? And I think the answer is incredibly harmful. I think it's essentially like the digital version of cigarettes, and has been really, really like, I think when historians look back on the time period that we just went through, they will point to the unchecked rise of social media companies as one of the biggest contributors to the sort of negatives that plague our society right now of almost anything. I think another really big hint on that is if you go talk to anybody that worked at a social media company, did their kids use social media? Definitely not. So like, what does that tell you, right? And like, I think it's, I don't like to go too far on these things because I do think that there are always elements of personal responsibility and everybody should be free to make their own choices. But I think a lot of these platforms exploit the deepest vulnerabilities of humanity to make money, and I find it revolting. Hopefully that was a strong enough answer. I wanted a diatribe. You know?
Everybody wanted to hear.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
All right, any other questions? Fast and furious, okay. And on that happy note.
Yeah.
Here, and we also have our book in the library, so it's available for checkout too, so.
Oh, the paperback is coming out probably early next year as well. So I just saw like the design for it the other day. It'll look very similar. So yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.